everybody, welcome back to the Consummate Athlete Podcast. I'm Molly Herford, and when I am not recording this podcast or writing all about fitness, nutrition, endurance, sport, racing, etc., I am hopefully outside getting one of those things done.
And I am Peter Glassford. I'm an endurance coach and a registered kinesiologist, and you are here on the Consummate Athlete Podcast, where we talk to all different types of sporting experts and athletes about what they do, the movements they do, and then we try and apply that back to our own sports, movements, lives, and just try and make those better.
I think I'm understanding the psycho eyes thing that my dad accused you of.
I do. A lot of times when I'm talking on video, it's hard because my eyes go into like the back of my head. It's really odd. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like I've said this before, but I'm going to say it again. You guys are really lucky that we don't record these live on YouTube or anything, because it's a little weird.
Yeah. I mean, it's just good editing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, welcome to the podcast. So, Peter, what have you been up to this week? It's been a busy week because last time we recorded, it was pre-Mountain Bike Nationals. So you hadn't actually raced yet. We hadn't done a big run, hike, camp trip.
Yeah, a couple clinics or mini clinics thrown in there. Yeah, it's been busy times. And then it's sort of, we're not saying well, I guess we're saying that we're coming into cyclocross season here a little bit, as much as we all sort of grimace a little bit. It is getting more and more popular. So the sort of preamble to that, early training. So I have a couple stock training plans. I have, building out people sort of like August, September sort of prep for cyclocross. So that's been busy getting ready for that. But yeah, Mountain Bike Nationals went well. It was good to see everyone. I did about as well as I can expect. So
All right.
More importantly, athletes did fairly well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, you transitioned pretty quick from being at Mountain Bike Nationals to, boom, now we're on the trail. We went up to Killarney Provincial Park. If anyone is in Ontario or around Ontario, Killarney Provincial Park is awesome. You should definitely put it on your bucket list of places to explore. We talked about it last year because we did a
we had Eric
speedy
Batty on as well talking about that almost particular situation, right?
Yeah, we did a pretty speedy through hike of the La Cloche Silhouette Trail there last year. It's about 78K, and some people will do it in, a week or 10 days, and some people do it in 3 or 4. We did it in 2, which we know plenty of people who've done that as well. So we didn't do that this time. We actually just used their campground, which is really nice, actually. It's rustic, but not so rustic that you can't enjoy being there with a family and sort of some of the comforts of home, I'll say. Like, none of the campsites, even the trailer ones, have electric hookups.
Right.
So it's very dark. It's actually, they have one of the big telescopes there, so they actually don't have lights in the park, really. Or very many, because it's supposed to be as dark as possible so you can do some good stargazing. So it is a really, really, really cool place. Highly recommend visiting. We did a bunch of hiking and running there, checking out both ends of the La Cloche Silhouette Trail. And yeah.
Pre-running, yes.
Yeah.
Preparing. But it was good. Yeah, good preparation. Good little sort of, I guess it was sort of a post-nationals trip of sorts. I don't know.
0 to 100 for you running wise, or maybe we'll say 10 to 100 running wise.
I felt like I was conservative in that, but yeah, we were out long days on feet, but it was good. So far, I've recovered well from that, so we're on track. And then last night we were down in Toronto for a large event. Actually, they did a great job. It was at Patagonia in Toronto, and they had a bunch of different people, including yourself.
Yeah, they were showing a screening of this really cool little short film, Life of Pi. That's Pi, P-I-E, like pizza. Super cool film about some rad women doing cool stuff out in Colorado. So they showed that, but they also had a few different bike groups in to talk about, just different bike initiatives in the area. So they had a couple of cool places, or cool people and places there to talk about some different bike repair type stuff, bike shop, trail cleanup stuff. And then they had me talking about Shred Girls. This was really fun, packed crowd. I was super impressed by just how well put together it was. So yeah, that was really fun.
Yeah, fairly, and not like, they did a great job, I thought, of no one was speaking for too long. The movie wasn't too long. The social thing was good, but everyone was sort of in and out, and I guess even a 2-hour sort of total time.
Your favorite, all killer, no filler.
It was awesome. Really good. And then we got to look at lovely Patagonia stuff as well while we're in there.
I'd like to say Peter got to look at lovely Patagonia stuff. I was working.
Well, you know.
His Christmas list has gotten much longer.
Yeah, so that was good. So let's get right into it. We have some Q&A today. The first one's sort of about plateauing, right? Which is sort of a common thing. A lot of times people start looking into coaching or training plans, which is probably a good first step, really, honestly, based on sort of what a plateau can mean. But sort of this plateau idea that like you've been training, you've been, going through the grind, maybe for months, maybe years in some case, and you just feel like you're not progressing, right? You sort of hit a wall or a ceiling and you're wondering, oh, is this me getting old and I just can't expect any more improvement?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to remember with the plateaus is just that it's not necessarily a bad thing. At some point you're just going to hit an upward limit of what you can do. Like Nino Schurter or trying to think of like any other. Katie Compton does not think that, oh, I've only gotten, 0.5% better this year, I must be plateaued. No, she just thinks, oh, I'm at the top of my game right now. Like this is where I should be. So, I think the first thing to do when you feel like you've plateaued is maybe to do a bit more of like a critical assessment and ask, have I actually plateaued, or am I just in a good place for me with the training that I'm currently doing?
Yeah, and I think in all those cases, there's probably things, there's a lot of ways to gauge improvement, right? So power numbers might not improve at a certain point for some people. You sort of start, given the time you have, or you're maybe at your genetic limit. If you are sort of an elite level person, you may be banging up against that sort of, this is the best you're going to get in some areas. But, mountain biking would be an obvious one where most people, even at the elite level, have gains to be made in the consistency of their technical skills, or just progressing their technical skills. And that would trickle down, right? So as we get into the intermediates, into age groupers, it's very common that things that are fairly essential to the sport, whether that's like your start form for mountain biking or cyclocross, hopping over logs, that sort of thing, just isn't as good as it could be.
Yeah, and I mean, on the running side of that, there's plenty of technical work to be done with running in terms of trail running and stuff like that. So,
and it could be in both cases, right? There's the, I can hop a bigger log or a more extreme log. I can do a backflip and do this massive jump. But there's also, in the trail running example is a great one. Just the more you do, and this is where the older athletes keep getting more and more efficient, you're just more and more comfortable. You've been in the mountains so much that you just can go down a trail and you've seen rocks before and you've run and picked your line, that like it's almost subconscious, right? So you keep getting faster and faster, or the exertion keeps getting lower and lower. The mental energy gets lower and lower for you to do essentially the same things, right? So that's where someone like a Katie Compton, who's like an experienced national and champion world-class racer, maybe isn't getting faster in like a testing standpoint, but maybe at the end of the race, at the end of that last lap, she hasn't been so mentally exerted because it's familiar, right? And the dismounts and stuff like that, she's not thinking about it, right? The muddy, crazy atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So a lot of us, there is something to that just showing up.
Yeah, I think, there's also just the thinking critically about if you're plateaued for the work that you're currently doing. So we've talked a bunch about this. It's really easy to feel like you've plateaued and think it's you that's plateaued. But it might be more your training stimulus is a little flat lately.
Right. And so we might have, like, if you're doing the same thing, there's like that, it's attributed to Einstein, the like doing the same thing and expecting different results, right? And so there might be something you have to change. These days it seems like everyone's, I just ride the trainer a bunch of times a week and do sweet spot. I'm just riding in that middle ground intensity, and that's fine. That works for some time, right? I'm fond of Dan John, the strength coach, has a saying, everything works for 6 weeks, right? So periodization, planning your training. So maybe you have a phase of like sweet spot and you're building up the time you can hold sort of just under that threshold. Runners could do this as well, but there needs to be a mix, right? We often talk about, mid-season sort of recovery weeks. So you're backing off that same load, same trainer workouts, giving yourself a mental, physical break, and then maybe doing like an endurance block where you're not even touching that high intensity, right? And then maybe right after that you go back into sweet spot or into more of a polarized sort of like really easy or really high intensity, right? So just mixing up and periodizing your training. A lot of people are missing that just planning of training. It's sort of just haphazard, right?
Do you have any signs that would suggest a plateau is physical versus more of just like a mental one? Because I mean, a plateau could also be sort of a warning sign that you're about to be kind of overtrained in that burnout-y phase.
And that's a great, I guess, delineation. Like, I guess if we use my example of nationals, right? So I've been sort of 5, 6, 7, 8. I think I was ninth for like the last 10 years at nationals. So, like, is that I wouldn't say I'm really progressing. If anything, I'm getting further away. But I'm also not like increasingly. I don't want to say not trying as hard, but I'm certainly not training specifically for that event. Each year it's less and less, I would say, right? I'm getting efficient. And like I say, there's a lot of things where it's just like I've ridden all this stuff and technically I am getting better and tactically I understand. And I finally realize that if I work on my start, then the whole race goes better. So you're just getting smarter tactically, right? But if we just strictly looked at those results, then we'd say, oh, maybe I'm plateauing. But at the same time, my energy, I would say my health in the last few years has gotten better in many ways. But I'm also not like physically, like I can go and do workouts, right? Like, and I can see those power numbers and there's the ebb and flow each year and I get the odd PB, but like, things are progressing. So in general, like I'm fine. But you could also have a situation where like you've been pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and you just feel like run down and maybe numbers are, you're not seeing that ebb and flow with the season even. You're not seeing progression. You may even see regression where you just can't push, right? So you maybe used to do 300 on your threshold test, whatever that is, and then now it's like 270 and you feel like you're working way harder.
And I'd say both of us have been down that road in the last 10 years.
Sure. And it happens, and but the trick is not letting it happen for years or months, right? Like backing off, right? Like it's normal to get tired or to feel like you've gone too deep or need a break. But it's knowing when to say when, right? Before it's too long. I think the other thing that sort of relates to that is that when you start into a new sport, you often will have linear gains. So like you'll put in 1 unit of work and you'll get 1% better or however you want to make your line, right? So you keep training and you increase the amount you train and you keep getting better and better. And you can like almost feel it, right? Because you were like a complete beginner, so you couldn't ride a bike and then all of a sudden you could ride a bike. Like that's a big transition, right? And then you could do 100 on your threshold test and then the next month you could do 130. So that went up like 30%. Right. Like, and it almost happens like that, especially early. But then once you're getting up into that, like, I don't know, I'm trying to think for men, it would be like sort of like a 270 watt threshold test type thing. Once you're getting like over those ones where like a lot of people can do that. And then you're getting, I want to get 300, but not so many people do that. And then it keeps getting harder and harder and harder. Right. So it just becomes more specific. And that's where that periodization of training, that undulation, it can't just be like go out and ride and go out and do the group ride. Sometimes once you get past that period of linear gains, you're maybe getting to that like late intermediate stage. That's where we have to start thinking and planning and periodizing more so, right?
Right.
So I think that's hopefully helpful on the plateau. We'll put 1 or 2 links. I know I've written at least one article just on how to test, like different ways to test yourself. Just so it's not just the results. So you're not like me where you're like, I'm always 7th place at nationals.
Yeah, and we've talked about this before. I mean, a lot of people base their feeling of plateau on their results, which might be fine if you're always racing the same race type and the same type of people or the same people in every race.
Well,
like a lot of local series
right.
will, you're always racing the same 5 guys and you're always, that you're going to be the 3rd out of these 5 guys. And, that feels like a plateau. And that's maybe a reasonable thing. But if you're doing more, I think I'm going to say running and triathlon are a little bit different than cycling in that you tend to not really race against the same people every single time unless you're at the most elite level and going to all of the biggest races. But I mean, in the past, 3 years, I don't think I've ever been on a start line with people that I recognized in any runs or triathlons.
Yeah, not
So
super regularly.
it's
Yeah.
really hard to say, oh, well, I've been, improving because my results are better, or I'm getting worse because my results are getting worse, because you just don't have any context for who you're beating. And I mean, with running, or, with trail running or something like that, where, 10K is not necessarily 10K, you can't even really base it on time. So I think in that case, you do need to kind of figure out what your consistent testing situation is, so you can actually see, oh, okay, I have gotten faster on this trail or something like that. So it's a little bit harder outside of cycling, where you can get on a trainer and see a power number. I think it's a little trickier, but it can be done.
Yeah, and I think we have to assume that the people we're competing against are also working hard and trying to progress. So it might not be regular for you to actually get faster, but not see the result necessarily improve, right? Because everyone's going through this like base build phase in some way. Everyone gets to the summer and feels like they can ride more or get outside more, and they're happier, and they've been competing more, so they're more familiar with competition. So everyone should be getting better. That's what we almost hope for, right? So that the competition continues. And I guess the only other thing related to that is just making sure that we have progressive overload, right? So that we are continuing to improve. We sort of talked about that, but I just want to make sure that like training continues to get more challenging. Mm-hmm. And that could be more climbing, more intervals, more endurance, more volume, more technical. What else? More climbing was one we've talked about too.
Yes, it doesn't always just have to go longer or even harder.
Yeah, and testing could mean just tracking like time for the week, or distance for the week if it's relevant. I really like that meters climbed for the week. It's sort of a good one to see like how hard is your training, because if there's climbing, it's usually takes some work, right? So for most athletes who involve climbing in their race, it would be a pretty easy one to track these days. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. All right, on to the next.
Well, we have a big one.
Yeah, so this topic is one that we actually got asked a few questions about. One was sort of this overarching idea of, do supplements work, and if so, which ones should I be using? But then we had a few specific ones. Someone asked about beetroot juice. Someone asked about bicarbonate lotions. Someone asked about ketone esters. So we kind of wanted to address this as a bit more of like a global look at, what's the deal with supplements, and, how do they fit into the everyday athlete's life. So where do you want to start here?
Well, I mean, I think, and we'll say that we will continue to look for experts. We take suggestions on people who study these different things. So if there is someone who you think is like, oh yeah, they know ketones, like, we'll talk to them, right? Especially if they're not selling ketones.
Which is very hard to find.
Right. Because we all have our, I guess, own biases too. But I think the other thing in line with, we'll keep working and keep listening. Thank you for listening. But we also have some previous podcasts that do help with at least this thought process, if not some of these specific things. So way back, we had Kyle Boersma on. I believe that episode was called
How to Run.
How to Run. And he is a runner, obviously, down with the Guelph Track Club. Very accomplished, and he's actually taken up some cycling, so he was a consummate athlete because he was sort of doing multiple sports as well. But he also has done a ton in terms of studying beetroot juice. So that episode's really good, and he talks about who it's relevant for and just sort of what is involved in supplementing with nitrates. We also had Alex Hutchison on for his book Endure, which is a great book to read and sort of will help you understand some of these concepts around studies and just like what it means. But Alex, in his own writing, will link to some of his articles too on beetroot juice. He's wrote on beetroot juice a ton, but a few other supplements as well. So that's something to consider looking into. Upcoming, we'll have David Epstein on in his book Range, which is also quite good at looking at studies. And then we had Dr. Bubbs on just recently, and he talked about a couple different things and listed sort of some different things to consider when looking at research and just some things that sort of work. And also this concept of big rocks that, the big things like sleep, nutrition, effective training, like we were just talking about with sort of progressive overload. And sort of these are the things that none of us want to do, but they're the things that actually work, right?
I mean, you just rattled off a bunch of episodes, so we'll have all the links for them in the show notes.
Right.
So what is your sort of overarching take on supplements?
I think over the years, especially, I've just come to think, there's no magic pill, and unfortunately, like,
Very unfortunate.
things take time, right? And we don't always have time, and we don't always have money. So it's understandable that, like, we all have this thing, this compulsion, I guess, to look, or this want for something, right? Something to just add in or to supplement. And that could be, the latest altitude training, or it could be, any variety of things, right?
Actually,
I think when we're talking
super weird one, I remember the first time I read Triathlete magazine, and we're talking like 12 years ago, there was this little tiny paragraph of a story about how coconut water was like the next big thing. And I have that thing cut out, saved. I started drinking coconut water immediately. And I mean, as far as mild supplementation-y type things, that's a pretty like chill one. But man, it is so easy to be influenced by pretty much any type of media saying, oh, this is the thing to try.
Yeah, it's pretty tricky. There's all these ads, right? And so I think for me, it's one of those things where it's just because something has an ad doesn't mean that it doesn't work, but it's a pretty good red flag, because it seems like a lot of the things that have stuck around and do work are not necessarily like flashy things. So like bicarbonate is just basically baking soda, beetroot juice is beets. Like a lot of these things that have shown any sort of efficacy tend to be sort of like things that you can at least recognize, like what they were derived from, or at least, or they actually are the thing. So like at least coconut water, like, is coconut water.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. Before we kind of get into any of that stuff, the other big caveat is there's a reason if you ask most pros what they're supplementing with or what their food routine looks like or any of that, they pretty much don't touch supplements. I've interviewed so many different professional athletes in all different disciplines, and I don't think I could name a single one that has told me, oh, I definitely take, XYZ supplements. And the reason for that partially is because supplements aren't regulated. So there's really no telling what's in them, to be honest. So first, you just have to kind of be aware of when you're taking a supplement, like if you go to a GNC and just buy a bunch of stuff there, there's no guarantee that everything in it is going to test legally. So if that's a thing that you're worried about, definitely something to kind of keep in mind as you look into any of these.
Yeah, it almost relates back to that to the plateau question, right? Like, I think that's often we're getting to this period where we feel like we're not getting that linear gains. We keep training, but we're not getting faster, and then we're getting older, or whatever that thought process is. And then we start trying to look for the thing that's going to help us continue, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And that thing might just be, okay, I need to, this is a hard block of training. I need to try and nap more. And you and I were sort of talking about how, it's potential, like, supplements are so expensive and they're not a for sure thing really ever. And we're talking such small percentages, but if you took that $50 for whey protein powder, whey protein's generally supported. You can get pretty well, like, third-party standardized. We know it comes from dairy, so it checks a lot of these boxes that we're sort of like, does this make sense? Is this safe? But then at the same time, like, if you could take that and you're like, okay, well, $50 is 2 hours of well-paid babysitting, probably. With those 2 hours where you can, like, get out and do like 2 hard runs or take 4 naps. I don't know if you can spread babysitting over 4 periods like that, but
don't think so.
You get what I'm saying. Like, there's sort of this, like, if the money is there, which is not the case for everyone, but that financial piece, and what could you do with that training? Is there something in the training that could be mimicked or not mimicked, but modified, right? Yeah.
Or even is there better quality regular food you could buy?
Yeah. Could you get whey from, a good quality dairy? Right? Mm-hmm. Probably, right? And you could probably buy a fair bit of yogurt, right? Some good Greek yogurt or something. You get some whey there, right? And you're going to get BCAAs, which is another popular supplement in that. So, I mean, that it's just to be considered. So I think, how do we want to go? This is such a big topic. But I think if we think through this a little bit, the one question we had was sort of, do supplements work? What do we know? And there's certainly things that have shown to be efficacious for certain populations and in certain applications. Does that make sense? So there's, something that is going to help build muscle or improve your short-term power. But what we want to think about is like, okay, so this, it seems like there's studies, maybe we've gone through, we'll put a list to sort of places where you can get position stands from things like the IOC or the ISSN, or we mentioned Alex Hutchison as another person who's pretty good with being on top of studies. Sort of have these things, and you can sort of do some research and see, like, is there like reputable people who aren't selling me, beetroot juice, but are there studies that are just like, beetroot juice seems to work for this application. And then once you know that there's those studies and that it sort of does work, and maybe does it work for an endurance athlete like myself doing a 90-minute mountain bike race, or is it more for like a 5-minute effort?
Right. Like if it's shown to be great for CrossFitters, does that really apply to you as a, marathon runner?
And maybe like untrained CrossFitters, right? Mm-hmm. That's often the catch, is like a lot of things are like untrained people do this thing and then they get fitter. Well, if they're untrained, they're probably going to get that linear gains where I was saying you get like 30% improvement just by going to a CrossFit gym. And this isn't picking on CrossFit. We could say you go to your cycling class and you get fitter from spin class, right? Sort of just makes sense. Like if you do something, you should get, in theory, better, right?
Yeah, a lot of studies are recreational athletes, which is a very broad general term.
Yeah, and that was the case with beetroot juice, and it's still sort of going back and forth, but there was this thing where like for more amateur athletes it actually seemed to help, and then the fitter you got, the less it seemed to help. And the thought was maybe, okay, elites have sort of maximized some of the adaptations already, and so they're just not seeing that improvement, right? Mm-hmm. Some of that stuff in the cardiovascular system and blood volume and stuff like that maybe the nitrate is helping with, right? I think the other important piece then is, so okay, we've gone through there's studies, it seems like there's reputable sources that aren't selling anything. Probably in those studies there's a mechanism, so again you could sort of look through and learn about how nitrate affects, again, the cardiovascular system. Sort of helps with blood flow. Okay, maybe it's reducing the energy cost. This sort of makes sense a bit to me. Can you sort of explain it in semi-layman's terms, right? Then, again, we talked about, is there a practical for your sport? Because if I gain weight from taking creatine and my mountain bike race involves a lot of climbing, then it might not matter that I got, a second faster in my start, or maybe not even that fast.
You're just super jacked.
Well, yeah, maybe. Or like I weigh 2 pounds extra, right? There's ways to avoid that, maybe with something like creatine, which is well supported, but again, well supported for what and for who, right? So I think we just need to be careful with that. And then related to that is, what is the dosing effect? Like, is there a dosing effect of creatine that wouldn't have as much side effect in terms of extra weight, or is that a thing? And then again, is it giving me a benefit that I actually need, right? Because there's usually going to be a trade-off with that too, potentially. So related to that then is side effects. A lot of these things seem to have an effect on the GI. So we were sort of joking about, you take beetroot juice, maybe you take some sodium bicarbonate.
There's some MCT oil in there.
You get in your ketones, and then
put it in your coffee.
All of a sudden you're on the start line and you need to go to the washroom quite badly, right? And there's the porta potty line, and and then this is screwing with your whole mental state, because you're like, wow, I have is it like runner's trots or something like that, right? I'm trying to find a word here that's not quite as disgusting, but there you go. So a lot of these things have side effects, right? It's a drug of sorts.
Actually, yeah, and for some reason, all of them make you poop.
It seems very common, which is interesting, right? But you're sort of throwing this like high dose of something in, right? So you can think about anything, right? I don't know if people have maybe done like a beet or kale smoothie. So whole foods, it should be good for you. It's health. Right? But if you go and take that smoothie right now, I guarantee you're going to end up in the washroom, right? So you need to be careful, because some of these side effects, like, yes, beetroot juice, again, you can get concentrated beetroot juice and stuff and nitrate, but you need to be careful, because while it might be 1% faster, if we can get you to the start line, you may not make it to the start line in a happy state or at all.
You're going to just use that sprint to get to the porta potty.
Yeah, and then again, you can back out. Like I always sort of ask myself, like, again, can I get whey protein from yogurt? Well, can you get nitrate from something like arugula? A lot of people haven't tried arugula. It's a leafy green, but it is one of the tastiest leafy greens out there, and it's the highest, I think, per weight, even higher than beets in nitrate, right? And so you could have a bit more beets and a bit more arugula in your salads, and just keep that chronically in your diet, and that's been well supported, and paleo community loves this, and away you go, right?
Yeah. Cheaper, ticks your vegetable box. Great.
Right. So we talked on the people selling stuff. Again, that's sort of a red flag, not a meaning that it doesn't work, but if there's this is like our proprietary blend of superfood SIA, then you just want to be a little careful, right? Because like, why is it proprietary? Yeah, and again, not that it's bad, but you just want to be careful. And then I think the last thing is just, it doesn't necessarily affect all of us, but is this like a banned substance? Is this like a reputable source? Is it third party sort of certified? Because so many of these supplements, you'll see like the big headlines about, 90% of supplements don't have, regulation or don't have what they claim is in them, right? So they might be like just fillers, it might be something completely you don't want to take in something, right? So
right.
That's a lot of times when elite athletes don't take it, there's the doping thing, but then there's also just like, I just don't want to take some miscellaneous thing. I don't even know what it is.
Yeah, for sure. I think the last thing to kind of touch on too is, okay, so all of these things might possibly make you say 1% faster. So if you take 10 of them, are you 10% faster?
Yeah, and we haven't had Trent Stellenwerf on the podcast. He's one of our dream guests. But he does have a lot of good content, which I'll link to a few different articles. And one of the things that he's often quoted as sort of using as an example here is that you have all these things like caffeine's 2%, beetroot juice is 1%, sodium phosphate, like your baking soda is another 1%. So we would expect you're getting up to like 5% gains, right? So you're going to win. That's how far I was behind at nationals. If I just would have done all these supplements, what I would have won.
Yeah, would have
right.
crushed it.
That's math. I was 5% down, 5% gains. But unfortunately, it sort of ends up just being 1% all the time, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean that caffeine doesn't work, but it means that there's maybe something centrally in the brain that's like, oh well, you can get that extra percent. It might also mean that there's an element of sort of placebo, like, when we know we're taking this supplement that should be supported and isn't going to make us sick and all this stuff, maybe there is a bit of a placebo sort of mental edge there as well, right? And you just see that in studies where like if people think they're in like the like cutting edge sort of thing, they do get a little bit of a boost, and that's okay too, right? So I don't want to put words in his mouth, and I'll link to sort of the different articles he's written on this. He has a couple of things on what supplements work in his opinion and for who, and then also sort of a thought process as far as like using supplements properly in the right doses and so forth. But his thought process is you sort of pick the thing. I believe in caffeine. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of side effects. I like coffee. Coffee is my supplement. I like whey protein. It's convenient for us to travel. A lot of times you can't get good sources of protein when you're out at restaurants. So I like whey protein. So those are sort of my two go-to supplements. Well supported. I don't think you get many people arguing with you on those two things. There's certainly too much of either or people that can't take them. But that's my 1%, and just focus on training, sleeping, and, being happy otherwise.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of athletes even kind of forget how many supplements they're already using, right? Because sugar powder for your, sports drink is
right.
technically a supplement. Like those electrolytes, supplements, the magnesium, the calcium that you take at night, the multivitamin, all of those are supplements. So for most of us, we're already taking several different supplements. They might be the most normal things in the world. Like you said, coffee, technically a supplement. So you're probably already hitting a lot of them. So, you got to kind of question, like, at what point do you need to kind of, put a pin in it and be like, okay, this is it.
Yeah, and Trent makes the point in one of his things that like these should be cycled, right? So not only should you be like knowing the timing and dosage of something like caffeine to really maximize that, which takes time and energy to learn and execute, but you also want to be cycling on and off of all of this stuff, right?
Yeah, you can pry my coffee out of my cold dead hands.
So just, you don't need to take your creatine or your protein powder. Give yourself a break. And for a lot of us, I know when I was younger, this is like, just don't do anything and see, do you actually feel any different? Because that like magic greens powder or something may actually not be, like, you may actually feel better, right? There may have been something that wasn't making your body feel good in whatever the supplement is. Or they're interacting, right? And so I think we have to be careful because there's so much stuff. Like it could be stuff you're applying to your skin, your hair, muscle rubs. We have Tylenol and NSAIDs thrown in there. Whey proteins, you said sugar powders, recovery powders. There's just a lot, right? And so I think because it's such a hard thing, even just to like get your coffee dosage, figure it out. When are you having it? How are you getting it to the race? I think just really giving some thought to like, what do I need? What can I afford? What is safe? What is, likely to give me that benefit? What do I believe in? And then just putting the rest of that energy, time, money into the trainings, right? The adventures.
Yes, and if at a race someone comes up and offers to put their whatever bicarbonate CBD lotion on you, don't do it.
Well, certainly race day, right? And that's a big, that's always the Iron Man joke, but it's not just Iron Man. They just have a better festival, I think, is the problem there. But
it's true.
Yeah, on race day, right? You don't generally want to try new anything, right? At race month, even ideally, right? Whether it's a new saddle or, a new bike position or whatever, we want to be careful. I think my closing thing would be just, you can get help with a lot of this stuff, right? It does get confusing, but I think when we start getting into, okay, I need to do this really crazy thing, going and getting blood work, going and having someone help you with a plan, where are you now? What are you trying to do? What's reasonable to expect? How are we going to test this? How long are we going to do it? What's the pre-post test on this, right? And that alone might just be I'm just going to keep riding my bike and, I'm rolling pretty well. I'll just take a nap periodically.
Yeah, I would have to say I would shout out Inside Tracker for this because not only do they do the blood testing, they'll also then send a pretty hefty report with recommendations. And I liked that none of their recommendations were super supplementy. It was all pretty much whole foods based. Very low key, not pushing any supplements. So I liked that. But any, doctor, dietitian, person like that can do blood work, also a great idea. Naturopath, I guess.
Sure. Yep. In Canada, at least, I think in the States, sort of functional medicine or something like that.
Yeah, for sure. All right. And our last question is woman who gets up very early for runs. Before her runs, she'll do, toast with a bit of peanut butter, something like super, super light breakfast, basically banana some days, that kind of thing. Runs, give or take, 60 to 90 minutes, say, and then gets home, has kids, has a job, has to get ready. The day starts pretty quick. But she wants to make sure she's getting in the right recovery breakfast.
Right.
So what advice do we have for her?
Well, it's tough, right? Because it's logistical. It's, you got kids running around and got to get to work and stuff.
Because the basic answer is just a meal. And that's, that good plate where it's some vegetables, some carbohydrates, some protein, some fats. Because, not only are you trying to recover from the workout where you need the carbohydrate and protein, you're also just trying to have your breakfast to set you up for a good day. So, it's a tricky one because on one hand, you want to be oh yeah, sit down and have a full meal. But with 3 kids running around and needing to get to work, that is not necessarily a realistic or relaxing thing to do. Okay, you might be able to sit at the counter and, have those eggs and potatoes or whatever, but it's sort of difficult if you have 3 minutes to eat it and kids are yelling or you're trying to grade a last minute paper or something like that before you get in the car to head to work. So I think this is not going to apply to everyone, but I think we've been talking about this. The smoothie might be the answer here because it gives you kind of you can check all of those vegetable, carbohydrate, protein, healthy fat, blend it up in a thing and then actually enjoy it on your drive to work instead of trying to slam something at the breakfast table.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you could definitely do that, especially when it's a question of not eating maybe for a long time after. A lot of us normal people, the workouts are not we're not necessarily training again in the evening, maybe not even training the next day. And that workout in the morning, is probably hard, but maybe not fully maximal, completely depleting. Right. So I think the window after is, you have a little bit of skew time there. They usually say 30 to 60 minutes. So, I think a snack, again, would be okay. Or, sort of a smoothie that sort of hits those bases, like you say, sort of a bit of veggie, throw some some leafy greens in there or something. It could be a whey protein or yogurt for your protein. And then, some berries, maybe a banana, that sort of thing. Get some carbohydrate. And then you could throw some fat in with some nut butter or something like that.
Yeah, definitely doesn't have to be super fancy to be a smoothie. You don't need to throw in like 18 adaptogens and all of these other
in line with
things.
what we were just talking about too, right? Like I think sometimes it's tempting to make like that the superest of superfoods, but sometimes it's just that convenient sort of like get that meal in. I think the other option would be, you could certainly have bars or something like that, but sometimes like that, they could be leftover dinner or lunch, and maybe that's even, smoothie, and then you do have sort of like a decent whole meal for lunch. Maybe you get a nice lunch break or something at work that you can sort of enjoy and sit down and have that good meal. But I think sometimes in life there's just that period of hustle, right? Someday maybe there'll be a relaxing breakfast, and that could be like the weekend, right? Like maybe the weekend there is time for that nice relaxing sit down breakfast. While kids are probably still running around, but
it's true. But yeah, I think, we tend to overthink this and think that we need to definitely get XYZ grams of this and this and this, and it has to be perfect or all is lost. But yeah, it basically eat like a normal.
No, I think, and that's the tricky bit, right? Like that's with what we're talking about with supplements. It's like for who, right? Like, is this like whey protein really needed, right? Or this recovery shake needed, right? A lot of times that like time to get recovered, if you just ate normal meals, that everything gets recovered usually in that sort of 24 hours.
Yeah, Canadian Running actually just posted a really good article with a woman who's an elite marathoner, but also like a full-time teacher. And it's just what she eats in a day. And I thought it was one of the best whole foods, reasonable examples that I'd ever seen. I'll include a link to that in the show notes. But it was just, very, very simple, real meals. There was not, sometimes when you read the like elite people, you're like, how are they only eating a sliver of salmon and a sprig of lettuce for dinner? And you realize they don't actually eat like that. They're just saying it for the article. This was the most realistic article that I've ever read in terms of what what an elite actually eats in a day with a full-time job.
And you mentioned the cookbook too is a great one, and they have like things like muffins and stuff.
Yeah, so Shillian Flanagan and Elise Kopecki have Run Fast, Cook Fast, Eat Slow, which is all super easy, quick prep, quick cook recipes, and a lot of them can be done in bulk and either refrigerated or even frozen. So and there's a ton of muffins and
muffins that have like, I don't know, I can't recall if they had vegetables in them or not, but like they'd have like maybe a bunch of egg or something, right? So they're a little more protein rich than your standard muffin. Yeah,
and it's actually really easy. The one that I've always liked making is if you use a muffin tray, you can basically make mini quiche frittata-y-esque things with eggs. It's just eggs, veggies, oil the pan a little bit, throw them in, and you basically have these little muffin-sized egg patties, like almost what you'd get on like an Egg McMuffin type thing, but a healthy made-at-home version. So you can even kind of DIY your own Egg McMuffin that has a bunch of veggies in it and kind of
because sometimes again, like you're sort of, I guess, stuffing that in your mouth. It's not necessarily eating slowly, but again, sometimes there's a hustle. But yeah, sometimes you can get those sort of like all-in-one like package type foods, right?
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Well, I think we will wrap up there. As always, if you have any questions, if you have any supplement experts you'd like to hear from, or if you have any other supplements you're wondering about that you'd like us to find an expert for, I'd love to find, someone who can kind of speak to how all of these play out. Let us know. You can find me at Molly J. Herford. You can find Peter at Peter Glassford. ConsummateAthlete.com has a contact form. So yeah, ask us anything. Keep the training, racing, nutrition questions coming. And as always, if you've already rated and reviewed the podcast, thank you so much. If you haven't, if you could do that, that's super helpful for us getting big guests on. Like I said, we have David Epstein coming up, which is super exciting. And to get more awesome guests like him coming on, the ratings and reviews really help. If you've already done that, thank you so much. And if you could maybe share the episode with a friend, share your favorite episode with a friend, that would be amazing as well. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next week.